everyone, and welcome to the Culture Cast. I'm Chris Dashew, and I'm joined by two people that you have heard on this podcast before. She is a award-winning director, and a puppeteer, and a comic writer, and an artist, and everything in between. Maggie Turner, or Maggie the Odd.
Hey, gang.
And everyone's favorite West Coast daddy, it's Big Rich from the West Coast.
Hey, lady!
Oh my god. All of a sudden he's a character in a Don Bluth cartoon, everyone.
Well, that was my attempt at a Jerry Lewis impression. I don't know why I'm doing Jerry. I guess it's, just after Labor Day. I've been in the mind of the telethon, but that was my attempt at Jerry Lewis.
Well, I can tell you with absolute certainty that the film we are talking about on this episode of the Culture Cast has nothing to do with Jerry Lewis, but it was produced by Mel Brooks, which led to some confusion for the going audience in 1986. We're talking about David Cronenberg's magnum opus, The Fly.
I think you're making a mistake. I think you really want to talk to me.
Sorry, I have 3 other interviews to do before this party's over.
Yeah, but they're not working on something that'll change the world as we know it.
They say they are.
Yeah, but they're lying.
There is a limit, even to the imagination.
Human teleportation, molecular decimation, breakdown, and reformation is inherently purging.
Where our greatest creations meet our deepest fears.
Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong.
You are about to go beyond that limit.
Those weird hairs that were growing out of your back, I had them analyzed. But they were definitely not human.
If you saw how scared and angry and desperate he is.
I'm sure Typhoid Mary was a very nice person, too, when you saw her socially.
No!
You're afraid to be destroyed and recreated, aren't you?
You're changing, Seth. Everything about you is changing.
Oh, no. What's happening to me? Am I dying?
I want to know what's going on.
What does the disease want?
It wants to turn me into something else.
Oh, no.
A fly got into the transmitter pod with me that first time when I was alone.
Don't go back to it. It could be contagious.
I'm afraid!
Don't be afraid!
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
Help me. Please, help me.
The film is directed by Mr. Cronenberg. It is written by Charles Edward Pogue and David Cronenberg. It is loosely based on the 1957 short story and the 1958 film of the same name, The Fly. It stars everyone's favorite eccentric actor, Mr. Jeff Goldblum, and the focus of this month's theme, Geena Davis, along with John Getz, who, and I quote, is too busy to talk to you this month, so go fuck yourself. Jeff Goldblum, I mean, he didn't tell me to go fuck myself, but his agent said he's too busy to talk to you. I wanted to retort back, well, it is COVID and he should be staying at home because he's in his mid-70s, but what do I know? I just care. The film stars Jeff Goldblum as Seth Brundle, a scientist who may or may not have figured out the secret to teleportation. Geena Davis plays a journalist who is tasked with figuring out if he is full of shit or not. Hilarity ensues when he gets teleported with a fly. And by hilarity, I mean penises falling off, fingernails falling off, and everything in between. Now, Maggie, I know you'd seen this film before, but I am curious what Richard thinks, because Richard has never seen this movie before, somehow.
I know, one of those weird blind spots in my cinema history, but I'd never seen it before. I mean, I think I'd seen parts of it on cable. It's that kind of thing. But anyway, I had sort of a mixed response to this movie. I love Jeff Goldblum. I think his performance is off the charts. The movie itself, David Cronenberg movies in general, somewhere in that area, I think this one started going a little off the rails for me. But I'm interested to hear what you guys thought, and then we'll tear it apart.
What about you, Maggie? What did you think rewatching The Fly, and when did you see it for the first time?
Oh, gosh. I actually watched it maybe about 5 years ago, then marathoned it for like a month after, just kind of picking it apart. But obviously I love it. But this time around, I think I picked up on what was bothering me about it as far as like either the pacing or the tone. It's like if it weren't for the score, it would be like a glorified anti-science PSA. Like, don't teleport even once.
You know, I had never thought about it that way, and we will get to the themes of this movie, because I would say that this film has overt and explicit and implicit themes, and Cronenberg has commented on them himself. As for myself, I remember the first time I watched this film. I watched this film when I was 16, and it was kind of on my path to watching more horror films. I wasn't exactly the biggest fan of horror when I was a kid, so this was pretty far outside of my comfort zone when I initially watched it. But I do remember when I was a young child having a sci-fi pinball game for my computer that featured 3 pinball tables based off of movies: Aliens, The Fly, and The Predator. And I remember playing The Fly one a lot and thinking it was amazing, not having any frame of reference for the film. But I remember watching it the first time and being, I would assume like most people who have seen this film for the first time, disgusted out of my mind. But once you watch it more times, I mean, it becomes less about how disgusting it is and more about how impressive the film's technical effects are, provided by Oscar winner from the film, Chris Wallace. But again, watching it for a critical viewing for the first time, to your point, Maggie, there are some problems, and I'm sure we're going to touch on them. But I mean, for me, it's a film that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of interesting stuff that has some things to say, whether it's, implicit or explicit. But it's an interesting movie, and it's not my favorite David Cronenberg film by any stretch of the imagination. That goes to Videodrome without a question. But it's a good movie, and like you mentioned, Richard, it's a fantastic performance by Jeff Goldblum. I mean, if not for Jeff Goldblum, I don't think anyone would care about this movie, because it would be, you had to have the right person in the role of Seth Brundle. Otherwise, he's not as sympathetic, but yet at times terrifying, as his character kind of slips farther into being a fly as a man and less of a man as a fly.
Yeah, because you can't go with a traditional leading man in the 80s. You can't go with, I suppose you could go with Harrison Ford, but why would you?
I mean, Harrison Ford could have pulled it off.
But like, who's in the sort of the range of not quite leading man necessarily? Like, for some reason, I keep thinking of William Hurt, but maybe that's because of Altered States. Someone who's like, mixed up in a bad scientific experiment, who's also a good actor. But it would have been like not a leading man. I mean, Jeff Goldblum, great casting, and yet at the same time, to me, is also how do I say this? I want to say a decision made through the same aesthetic that provides a lot of the movie's problems, which is David Cronenberg's inherent coldness. And I notice it primarily in this movie because the themes suggest that the film might have benefited from a little bit more warmth, so that we could, and God bless the guy for trying, for saying, I want to do something that's about people and characters and love and heart. But I think because, in my opinion, David Cronenberg is not necessarily adept in those areas, that the falling short felt even stronger. I wanted to feel in the greatest horror movies pity and terror for the monster, but in the end, the pity part, the oh my God, this relationship, but for his arrogance, could have been one of the great romances of all times. I want to feel sad for Geena Davis. And yet I couldn't. I was grossed out and kind of felt like, God, could this just please fucking end?
Jesus, Richard. And to answer your question, there's I don't know what else to say there. And to answer your question, there's only one actor who could have pulled this off. This summer, Arnold Schwarzenegger is The Fly. I mean, that's the thing about The Fly, at least for me, and I don't know how y'all feel about it. The film is so intrinsically tied to Jeff Goldblum now, I'm not sure I could see anyone else doing the role.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I don't know. His impression of a fly was pretty dead on.
Oh my God. I mean, the thing about the movie is you get to see Jeff Goldblum essentially out of makeup for 50 minutes, and then the rest of it is a cavalcade of disgusting effect after a disgusting effect, to the point where, like you mentioned, Richard, it's just like, oh my God, just end already, like, for fuck's sake. And look, like, here's the thing. I don't feel that way the way you do. I like how kind of over the top it gets, but I can totally see where you're coming from. Because by the end, when, you know, Geena Davis literally pulls Jeff Goldblum's jaw off, it's like, this better be the climax of the film, or else how much farther could this go? Like, how much farther could we devolve here?
Well, exactly, and at that point, well, you know, I mean, and while we're talking fantasy, there was a lot of the movie in the second half where I sat back going, "Wow, okay, so today, what if Guillermo del Toro did this movie, and in what way would it feel different? Would we be leaning more into wonder and away from body terror?" And I don't know. I mean, again, this is let's pretend, but I kept looking at it, and again, the only reason that it comes up for me is that my favorite Cronenberg movie is The Dead Zone, and I think it miraculously works because they stuck so closely to the Stephen King story, which is all heart and all emotion, and amazingly and thankfully, and to his credit, Cronenberg pulls that one off with a large degree of emotion. And the guy he cast is Christopher fucking Walken, not the warmest guy in the world, and still managed to pull it off. Now, frankly, Christopher Walken could have been The Fly.
Great. I love it. Come see my teleporters. Stop. Don't shoot me. I'm a fly. Buzz, buzz. Here we go. Boy.
How great would that be? That'd be awesome.
Oh, man, I don't know.
I don't know if you would be terrified or laughing the entire time. This summer, Christopher Walken is a man flying. Oh, no.
I just can't take Christopher Walken seriously after watching the musical rendition of Puss in Boots, where he played Puss in Boots. So it just ruined it, literally everything else.
Maggie, what is your David Cronenberg film of choice? Since Richard and I have given our picks for Cronenberg of choice. Honestly,
I'm cheesy enough to say this actually is my favorite. I never got as much into Videodrome as I wanted to. I think it was because I really wanted to rent it from the library, but that copy was gone for like 3 years. And it finally came back and I was super pumped about it. And then it's like, well, I got to see Debbie Harry, so that was fun. And Woods made the worst VCR.
That's true.
But like, I don't know. It's something about The Fly. And probably, I don't know, I enjoyed Naked Lunch. It was really, it was a trip and obviously a challenge to even make that movie because of the subject material that it like took from the book. But I don't know, this one was just kind of like the perfect, like gross out meets just kind of casual popcorn movie. It wasn't too long. And I really liked the wind up. I enjoyed the ending. I don't know if it was just because it was so over the top, but I don't know. This one, I think it's mostly, I enjoy it for the details and the points that it miss. Because of its kind of like alien nature, it kind of makes sense that it's like, oh yeah, no, it's this guy transforming into a fly. It kind of reminded me of how awkward the original with Vincent Price was. So I don't know. I enjoyed that.
I got to say, what I didn't expect when I started watching this movie was a movie whose last third would be primarily concerned with the subject of abortion.
Right.
Which is really weird.
It's really weird, but thematically, I'm like, wait, what's going on now? Now it's suddenly about, is she carrying the fly's larva, and then I'm like, oh, okay, because she probably got pregnant after the gene splicing. But then I'm like, oh, this is the theme. This is the theme. It almost like you could, I bet 100 college papers have been written about how this movie is about this sort of primal fear of pregnancy, or like what genes are being spliced together inside of me.
I always assumed that the film was an allegory, and they talk about it on Wikipedia. To your point, Richard, I'm sure there's been even more papers written about The Fly being an allegory for AIDS or cancer or the AIDS crisis of the 80s, otherwise known as the AIDS crisis of all time, because it's not like AIDS magically went away. But I mean, it was at such a height in the 80s with cultural awareness, except for Ronald Reagan, because that was a thing. But that's the way I've always looked at it. And this time I watched it, the abortion kind of angle feels really weird because it doesn't really
It feels
work.
really weird. Well, but I can totally buy that Cronenberg would be interested in that sort of gynecological kind of, again, body terror. I went there because we're now 30 years on from that. When you're in Fatal Attraction was about AIDS when it came out, because it's like, oh, what happens? What terrible things can happen after a casual hookup? And it's like, oh, okay, Fatal Attraction's about AIDS. Okay, I get that. This one felt like Jeff Goldblum got drunk and did something impulsive and ended up mixing his genetic material with the genetic material of something else and now had to live with the consequences. Geena Davis had sex with Jeff Goldblum, even though she knew he was kind of a nutball, and then got pregnant. And now something is happening within her that involves genetic material mixing together and what will be the product of that. And her ability to choose to stop it. Because if you look at it that way, Jeff Goldblum doesn't have a choice. Whatever he's going to become, he's going to become. Geena Davis, if she gets an abortion, still has a choice. She can get out of this and get that fucking fly larva, Brundle fly out of her. And I don't think there's a human being watching this movie who is not on some physical level going, oh, please, dear God, get an abortion. No matter what side of the political fence you're on. I mean, in a weird way, Cronenberg was brilliant if that was his goal, to really go, hey, guys, how about something's growing inside of you and you don't want it there? So how about we get an abortion? And it's very hard to argue against that in this movie.
You don't want a baby Brundle fly?
Hey, maybe she doesn't. Maybe she doesn't. And then, of course, Cronenberg plays the role of the abortionist.
Well, he plays the role of the he plays the role of the dream gynecologist, which was the other song. That was the sequel to Dream Weaver, was Dream Gynecologist. So.
Oh, he's the one holding up the
right. Yeah.
I thought he was the guy. Yeah. I thought he was the guy in the office going, well, are you sure you want to do this? It's the middle of the night. I'm like, wait, that's Cronenberg? Okay.
No, that is the fantastic character actor, Mr. Leslie Carlson, otherwise known as the main villain from Videodrome. So,
yep.
There you go.
There's things about this movie that, like we've already kind of mentioned about the themes that it touches on, it is kind of all over the place. I think my bigger issue this time watching the film is more of a structure of the film. It almost feels like when you have Geena Davis, finally leave the final time we see Goldblum, right, where he's still looks human, like not covered in makeup. You have that where he goes, leave, get out of here, go away. And then all of a sudden, his fingernails start falling off. The later half of the movie, it doesn't mesh very well together because it feels just like feels like vignettes. And it's like, it's a vignette and here he is and he looks a little worse. And the next time you see him, he's a little worse. And I don't mind it, but at the same time, it feels like stop and go. And
really, there was only like one iteration of Brundlefly where he's like, oh no, I'm scared, I'm worried. Then the rest of it's like, hey, look at this. You know what it is? I don't know. It's pretty great. I can climb on
But I'm
walls.
an insect. Like insect politics.
Right.
Which is
It's like, I think it would take more than a day to get over that.
Well, and that's the problem. And I think, to your point, Maggie, if they had, because you have 7 stages of Brundlefly in the movie, including
Correct.
Brundlefly teleplot, or Brundle booth, or Brundle thing, as it was known by the crew. If they had done one, and this is also to your point, Richard, if they had done 1 or 2 more where he's, walking with those canes and, he's scared, he's playing a scared character, I think you would have changed the dynamic of the film and the way that Goldblum's character is received, because now, like you've mentioned, Richard, you have this character who is sympathetic to a point, and then as soon as she goes from seeing him that one time where he's completely falling apart, his ear falls off, and then he goes to the next thing where he has sharpened teeth and his hair's falling out, but he still looks vaguely human. Like you mentioned, Maggie, he's all of a sudden like, this is fucking great. Look at me. It's like, hey, what? Like, it was like 2...
It'll make a great kid's book.
It's like, this is 2 fucking days later. Like, there's no time... The only time frame we get is the time frame from when she leaves to when he calls her, because I think she says it's been 4 weeks since I've seen you. But then everything else seems like it happens over the span of like a couple days, maybe?
Right.
Well, and it's frustrating. Well, a couple things. One is the character, what is his name? John Getz?
John Getz, plays Stathis Borans, a terrible name for a character.
Yeah. Also a terrible character, and the kind of character that shows up in 80s movies a lot, the asshole character, who seems to exist just to make the main character seem a little more palatable. It's almost like the worry is that Jeff Goldblum's going to come off like just too off-putting. So we're going to have to introduce another male character who's even worse. It happens a lot in cop movies. It's like in a Lethal Weapon movie or something. It's like, well, the cop character that we're rooting for, our main guy, Bruce Willis, Mel Gibson, Eddie Murphy, whoever, they don't play by the rules. So in real life, they'd be sort of an asshole, but we want you to like the way they don't follow the rules. So then we have to create the asshole character who's another cop who's just an asshole. So all of our hatred goes to that guy. So, but they did it a little too well in The Fly. And so that when they kind of quote unquote redeem him and he becomes Geena Davis's savior, it's unsavory. It's like, please don't tell me this means that she's going to end up, she's reevaluating her assessment of this dick, because he's a fucking nightmare.
Like you mentioned, it is weird because Seth Brundle is a prototypical Zuckerberg, Jobs, what have you, genius scientist who has absolutely no frame of reference how to interact with people. And the character of Stathis Borans, you didn't even have to make him a terrible person, because what is gained by him being this kind of slimy, smarmy dickhead, borderline or even complete, kind of misogynist. The fact that he shows up in her apartment, it's all the time. It's just like, this guy is a molecular level piece of shit. And yet, like you mentioned, Richard, at the end of the movie, you're like, I feel bad for this guy. It's like, but what? Like, boy, talk about a bait and switch. Not only that, but what the thing you forget when you create a character like that, or more commonly in movies, when the main male character we're supposed to love has a really hideous bitch for an ex-wife, it's like, well, but he married her. Geena Davis dated this guy. The net effect of writing a character like that is that we lose respect for her. It's like, what were you ever doing with this guy? Did he just suddenly become a misogynist dick? It's like, now we're questioning her. That's not where you want the audience to go.
No, change your lock.
Yeah, for the love of God, do it. Lock,
or just get a guy who wasn't right for you, but is still a decent guy, and maybe even a sympathetic guy. That's the thing. And this is just my instinct, for characters. But it's like, just make him a sympathetic guy too. And by the way, make fucking okay. Here you go. Here's a version of this. have Jeff Goldblum be the self-involved scientist, right? And
which he is in the movie.
Who's totally. The guy he is in the first 15 minutes in the whole introductory sequence, and all he can think about is he's totally obsessed with his science and his scientific discovery. He's going to change the world. That's what he's going to do. He's clearly been a nerd his whole life, but now he meets this woman, and this woman changes his life. And this woman changes his life by making him more human, by giving him humanity, by introducing humanity, gene splicing humanity into Seth Brundle. And now we've got something to root for. We're rooting for that gene splicing. But at a crucial moment, fate intervenes, something goes wrong, he gives into his arrogance, or maybe he even decides, if I do this and I'm successful, now she'll really love me. Now we can then get married. I'll have money. I'll have made a name for myself. We can get married, have children. I can start my life. But he does it a little too quickly. And the arrogance got him. The hubris got him. And now he is gene spliced with the fly. And now we watch the second half as the tragedy unfolds and his humanity goes away, but we understand it in terms of the relationship. And now maybe you get the emotion that is the potential in this story.
I do wonder what the motivation was for making the character of Stathis Borans so unlikable. Because this film is a 3-cast movie. Almost down to a 2-cast movie. I mean, you have Goldblum and Davis, and that's it. And I don't understand why you make 2 characters so close to each other without giving... I mean, there needs to be some sort of differentiation between the two, and there's not, and it does, again, feel completely unearned when at the end of the movie, the only reason Geena Davis's character survives is because Stathis Borans shoots the telepod. I mean, otherwise she dies. I mean, there's no two ways about it, and so it's weird because 2 of the 3 characters in the movie are rather unlikable, and then Geena Davis is just kind of there, and I mean, realistically, for this being Geena Davis month and talking about films that she was in the 80s, her character, again, Geena Davis, she's not given a whole lot to do.
No, in fact, it would have been nice if they actually developed that relationship a bit more, because it does seem like it only just kind of happened and then they just kind of hung out a bit instead of actually really putting in some roots.
Yeah, why is she in love with him? Why does she fall for him so fast? Because he's a weirdo? Yeah. It's... I don't know how you feel about this, Maggie, but it feels like Geena Davis's character is like the computer in the film. She is the basal exposition of the film. She exists to push the film along, and other than that, she's not given a whole lot to do. Yeah,
that's a fair statement. It just kind of makes it... I mean, it's almost like cardboard cutout type of thing. And some of the details are really well thought out, but it's not the important details that actually knit everything together. It's like you had a really great story idea, but then you had to make up a bunch of scenes to get to point B. So you just kind of threw it in and hoped for the best.
Well, you're right. The focus and the focus of this film is so much on Goldblum, and I get that. That's legit. But compare it to other 80s movies like Alien or Aliens, where Sigourney Weaver plays a real character, and it's really about how she deals with this horror. I mean, there's a way to kind of reapportion some of the landscape of this film and really make it about this woman and her choices, good, bad, or indifferent, and sort of and just follow her.
That's a solid comparison for that, because I mean the way that they establish the characters' connection to one another, especially in Aliens, it's through that traumatic experience where it seems like Geena Davis met Jeff Goldblum just at this fucking, I don't know, your school science fair, and then they just went home so she could check it out. It was the most mundane way to try and spark that relationship to be as strong as it would be, where she wouldn't just jump town. She's actually going to put you out of your misery. It just didn't seem earned in that capacity. You wanted to, but it just never clicked. Whereas almost the immediate gut punch response, I almost wish if Goldblum's character Brundle knew about the pregnancy before he started really, really transforming so that he could be in on that terror as well, then it would almost seem a bit more solid.
As opposed to him just going, oh, by the way, now that I know, I'm going to kidnap you from the abortion clinic. in a scene, again, the scene that preludes, or the prelude to the scene at the abortion clinic is just Jeff Goldblum looking over the building and us assuming he heard everything they said. And it's like,
right.
It's like, okay, like you just mentioned, Maggie, it doesn't feel earned. And look, I don't know about Maggie, because Maggie, like you mentioned, this is your favorite Cronenberg movie. I didn't expect that we were going to tear this movie apart as much as we have.
Oh no, that's why I love it. It's because of its like big failures. Right. It comes off as so bizarre that I'm just fascinated with that. I love crap cinema for this reason, because there are really good thoughts behind this, but it's just the driver got really shithoused and now he's all over the road.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, look, Chris, you've subjected me to some movies that probably did not deserve the amount of attention we gave them. This is not one of them. This is, this is, there's a lot going on here. It's just sort of a matter of like, and again, unfortunately, some of it is 80s filmmaking and tropes of 80s filmmaking. Mm-hmm. Actually, I can't even say that. The use of a woman in a story as a means for the male character's transformation is still alive and well. I mean, you can find movies that came out this year that it's like, oh, so she's just there so that he learns that he needs to whatever. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is that Geena Davis is really good in this movie. Here's a weird question for you guys. So even in the first few minutes of the movie, I'm like, what? She gets in a car with this guy and drives, and now they're in like some fucked out warehouse and she goes inside. Like I'm watching it with 20/20 eyes and I'm like, no, you don't do this. This is not the way you would tell your daughter to behave. This is bad.
She was really hoping that if anything goes wrong, she could just throat chop him and get out of there.
Well, and I mean, she even mentions in that scene, she's like, oh, look at this shithole. And he's like, it looks cleaner on the inside. It's like, okay, what?
No, I'm not going to find out.
Yeah, like, I'm out of here. This looks like the building out of the beginning. It looks like the building that Isabella Johnny's character is in Possession. It's just like a rundown, concrete shell of a building, and Jeff Goldblum just happens to be inside doing, world-changing science. Oh,
yeah, that he doesn't expand upon. He's just like, no, I swear it's going to be sweet. When you go in there, it's going to blow your mind. You're going to have so much to write about. You'll be amazed. And it's like, actually, get out of my car.
And then the first thing he does, he tells her all this stuff, and he's, but don't write about this.
Yeah, he's like, what is that thing in your hand? What? Is that a recorder? Like, dude, you really ask what that is? Like,
yeah, she said she had 3 other interviews that night, so it's like, come on, bro.
She's a reporter. You bring her to your lab and tell her your secrets, and then say, but don't write it. What the fuck did you think was going to... Oh, I forgot. You know what? I forget this ever happened. That was a little weird.
So the original draft of the script by Charles Edward Pogue had the main characters, instead of one being a scientist and the other one being a journalist, they're a married couple, and he's still a scientist, but it's his wife. And, that harkens back more to the original film, obviously. But... Right. I think it would have worked better. I
don't know about that. I don't know. It sounds like
sympathy for their relationship, because their relationship's already pre-established, and you don't have to spend half of the movie explaining their relationship and trying to create it. And I mean, I don't think the film is particularly successful in making Geena Davis and Jeff Goldblum's relationship in the film particularly believable or sympathetic.
No. But I think there's like a careful balance where, because of all of the like really good themes about like the unknown, and especially at that end buildup where you're not sure if she will be able to do it or not. I think you kind of lose that if you established a long-term relationship between those two, because then it's like, oh, well, they love each other no matter what. They're going to make it through this, where it still can have those bleak themes because maybe they've been going out for a month or so, but there's still she could easily just book it.
Yeah, I guess you're right. And I guess what it speaks to, I wish there was just more of what does she want? You know, she's been in one bad relationship with, you know, that guy. Mm-hmm. And now she's getting into another relationship that seems better. What is it? What does she want? I mean, any sympathy you have for that relationship is totally earned by her. Mm-hmm. I mean, she does all the heavy lifting emotionally in this movie. Everyone else is just kind of strutting around, you know, turning into slides and acting like assholes. So it's like, if you're going to do that, it's just, there's this feeling of like, just give her a little bit more so we understand exactly what it is. What were her hopes and dreams? What was her investment in this relationship? What are the stakes? What is she losing? And yet, I swear to God, I got to come back to, she gets to that point and she's like, I want this fucking thing out of my body. Mm-hmm. And like, to me, that becomes the theme. It's just like, no, I'm pulling a U-turn on this. That guy seemed great for a little while. He's not. And I got to cut all ties. She clearly doesn't have the greatest track record with awesome guys. So now she's like, I gotta, no, I'm not doing this. I ain't taking one for the team. We're getting this fucking thing out of me. And I gotta say, I was 100% on her side in that desire. And when fucking Fly, quote unquote, saves her from her abortion, I'm like, no, you fucker. I absolutely lost all sympathy for everybody. Now I hate Brundle. I hate Strathis or whatever his name is. And I'm frustrated with Geena Davis. I get it. I'm like, okay, I know that based on the structure of this movie, I'm supposed to feel sorry for you and your predicament, but I'm frustrated with you too. I wish you had killed him a lot quicker.
And here's the other thing, and we didn't say this a lot last month, and you were both on a podcast in August for Indian cinema, so you know, I think we all agree no films last month needed to be any longer than they were because those movies were already topping out at 2.5, 3 hours. I actually think this movie may have benefited from maybe 20 minutes extra, maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes maybe. I mean, what's odd about this movie is that it's an hour and a half. And it really honestly needed a little bit longer to really build those relationships and not rush them between Goldblum and Jeena Davis.
So what would you have put? What would that 30 minutes be?
I think the 30 minutes would have been more of what I was talking about earlier, where you have Jeff Goldblum's character post-teleportation starting to fall apart, but you're really working towards making him a sympathetic character. And, you know, and making that downfall at the end, the eventual downfall that we all know is coming, making it more tragic, because he really only has one sympathetic transformation in the film, only one sympathetic stage of his transformation, and that's the one where he's, you know, he's walking with the crutches or with the canes. And to me, you need more of that to make him more sympathetic. If we're talking about leaving the film the way it is now and not giving the film a complete overhaul with the character motivations and the characters how they are.
You know, let me ask you this. I really liked the way the movie opened. I mean, I was very immediately involved and intrigued. You know, it starts on a close-up of Jeff Goldblum kind of saying, I've come up with something that's going to change the world. But it also made me feel like maybe they cut the first 5 or 10 minutes. like you wouldn't, like, that seems like an odd way. If I sat down to write something, I might not start it there. I might start with him in the lab, or him doing something, or her getting the assignment, or just something to sort of get you to the, you've got to go to a party and talk to these crazy inventors. I don't want to. Yeah, well, you have to. Do you get the feeling that something was cut out at the beginning?
Yeah, like even them entering the building. It's like any movie from that age, this age, whatever, there would be that kind of expansive like introductory shot so you know where the fuck you are. Instead, you're in the middle of this room and it does drop you in.
It's a pretty cold
sudden.
open.
Yeah. Pretty cold movie.
So there are some things cut out of the movie. The notorious monkey cat scene, which is... I think the film, as awful as the scene is, and you can watch it on the DVD, you can watch it on YouTube, it's a scene where Brundle attempts to replicate what he was doing and try to figure out what went wrong while he's trying to find a cure, and he puts a monkey and a cat in the machine and turns it into a monkey cat, and then he murders it with like a crowbar, which, I mean, it's an awful scene. I mean, it's disgusting, but I think the film needed something like that because it needs to show that he's like trying to fix it as opposed to just us assuming that's what he's doing. And then there's the scene where the fly leg shoots out of his side and he bites it off, which is, you know, if that was something you wanted to see. And then there's the final scene of the movie that was cut out after a screening of the film, which was it has this weird name that it's given, and it's called like the butterfly embryo, the butterfly baby coda is what it's called. And you have like a baby that ends up having, like, it's a Geena Davis dream at the end, and it's a baby that ends up having wings coming out of it like a butterfly. I mean, again, you know, again, it just goes back to both of your points where it's like, this movie could have used a little bit more. And honestly, the maggot baby dream, as great as it is that, you know, David Cronenberg is in it, you know, it definitely could have been at the end of the movie, and it probably would have worked just as poorly there as it does in the rest of the film.
Yeah, fair.
But I mean, I get it. I mean, I get they can't. It's like, look, there's a horror movie, so let's just keep delivering, and it'll also help set up her state of mind. Like, once you see that scene, everything after that, when she's like, yeah, I'm not, whatever this is, no.
Yeah, fuck this baby.
And yet she still has the child, because that's what the sequel is about, by the way.
Yeah, no, I remember that.
Oh, shit, you're right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, I mean, the movie ends without resolving that question, and I have not seen Fly 2, obviously, so wow. So then the butterfly dream is, the butterfly dream is her dream then of, well, but what if it works out? What if it's beautiful? But man, Jesus fucking Christ.
No joke.
And I'm sure Maggie would echo this. The Fly 2 is not a dream. It is a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, it's like the worst Benadryl fever dream you could have thought of.
There's some fun, like legitimately hilarious, memeable moments from the second film.
Dude, left and right. It's worth it for the novelty, but
I mean, the effects are good, but the thing is, and I'm sure you would agree with me, the second film is all about the effects and nothing else. It is a shell of a plot.
It's a spectacle.
I mean, you have Eric Stoltz, the acting powerhouse Eric Stoltz, playing the love child of Jeff Goldblum and Geena Davis, who has the dormant fly DNA inside of him.
Okay.
And so he ends up working for Bartok of Bartok Industries, and they're trying to figure out a way to cure him, but also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Maggie, weaponize the fly mutation?
It's something like that. I know they wanted to exploit it more so than transform it, because wasn't that the whole entire rapid fire ending? It's like, they're using me. I have to break free.
Yeah, and then, you have it's just real stupid. It's the way they end up explaining how they spoilers for The Fly 2. I wouldn't go watch it. You can find the best parts of it on YouTube. The way that they explain how to cure what was happening to Jeff Goldblum in the first film is exactly what Jeff Goldblum was talking about in the first film, which is, if I get into a telepod with another person and we merge, that person will get the fly DNA and I will get their normal DNA. It's essentially a blood sacrifice. You're turning someone else into a fly to turn back into a human.
Which I don't think would even work on a scientific basis on like common logic. I think that just means that someone's getting a third of fly DNA, right. Or it's just going to be a giant mass of inside.
Kill me.
Yeah,
right.
It's way worse than anything we saw in the first movie.
That's almost too simple in a way, because then it's almost like, well, why not just go get some fucking. You know, according to the morals of this movie, just go get a homeless guy off the street, punch him in the face till he goes unconscious, stick him in the machine, climb in with him, problem solved. Like that's a little too 1-to-1.
It's lazy.
I don't know if they were really saying that that's all it took, but Jesus Christ, if that's all it took, I would have. And I was Jeff Goldblum, I would have gone and grabbed some useless piece of human flesh and done it.
It's just lazy.
Right.
It's just ultimately lazy. And the funny thing is, the second film doesn't feature Jeff Goldblum. It features him in a cameo, which was repurposed footage from the first film that they didn't use. Geena Davis has nothing to do with the second film because her character dies off in the first minute of the film. John Getz shows up to play Stathis, and he has a cane, and he doesn't have a hand, and he's a bitter old in quotations. He's a bitter old version of himself, and like that's it. And there's very little. There's very little of what made the first movie so good in the second film, except for Chris Wallace, who did the effects in the first movie. He's the director of the second film. So,
well, and also it feels like it's borrowing. I mean, isn't that straight from Aliens? The notion of industry is going to weaponize this monster
yeah, but that's
DNA.
Like the lazy direction you go in sci-fi if you just don't care. It's like, well, the military's weaponizing it.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, you don't know what you're dealing with.
I mean, to your point, the Alien franchise, even up until Alien Covenant, has never been able to get out from underneath that bullshit of, Weyland Yutani weaponizing the alien. It's like, Jesus Christ, no one could have come up with a more interesting motivation for people wanting these monsters other than to weaponize them, which clearly fucking never works because these things are uncontrollable monsters who will kill you at a moment's notice. It's just look, The Fly 2 is bad. It is a film that you should watch on YouTube. The parts where dudes are getting their like skin ripped off their heads and like weird things going on, and the Martin Brundle fly is pretty cool from like a design standpoint, but nobody from the first movie other than the guy who did the effects had anything to do with it.
And you essentially lose all the great detail of the first film that kind of made it more acceptable in the long run. I almost would have preferred if The Fly 2 was just, a repeat where maybe Geena Davis is trying to find the fly to try and use backflip into science. It's just so bad, and it could have been a little bit better.
Well, and
well, yeah, I mean, not being able. I get why you don't use Geena Davis, but that when it's one of the strongest things you have in the first movie, that's the only thing you could possibly import to the second movie. It's disappointing that.
Well, and the other thing about the first movie that the second movie doesn't have is, for the problems that the first film has, we still have Cronenberg's deft and metered hand with the effects. I mean, as much as The Fly. And I think we'd agree, The Fly is known as a kind of effects extravaganza. It doesn't punch you repeatedly in the face with the effects over and over. Constantly, it gives you moments of a reprieve. The second film is just like, here's effects. Fuck you, more effects. And it's like, oh, Jesus Christ. It's the alien syndrome, right? What's a good thing? Give them 10 times the good thing and hope that that's still a good thing. It's like, that's foot off the brake, or foot off the gas, maybe just a little bit, or maybe a lot of bit if we're talking about The Fly 2. And then, you have the Fly comic book that, completely ruins anything that The Fly 2 may have done. And then you have the multiple Fly sequels that never happened. Don't search out The Fly Outbreak. I read it this afternoon, and it is bad. Really bad. Actually, it is so bad that I don't understand how anyone spent hard-earned money on the 5-run comic that they did in 2015. It's bad. And then you have the opera, which is kind of fun.
Yeah. Kinda is the key word there.
I didn't see it, but I sort of get it. I mean, watching this at a certain point, I'm like, oh, right. Okay, the opera.
It's it is a tragedy. The film is a tragedy. But, in a tragedy, you need to have a little bit more sympathy for the main character. And when the main character is going, I'm an insect now. I am not a human. I am a man. I'm an insect who dreamed I was a man and the dream is over. It's like, so we never should have felt sorry for you to begin with?
My whole issue with the Fly opera is that there is no way you can do something of this musical level with this theme and it not be compared to Phantom of the Opera. It shares too much, and they just didn't have enough to really develop that to one-up the other one. It's like the Beetlejuice musical was actually very successful because of the outskirts musical goers bringing in a new audience. Same with Evil Dead the musical, but that's because it made it its own entity. Really sticking with the strict opera development, it just didn't really benefit. It was a weird option.
And the other thing is, to your point, Maggie, as you know, opera, the form of opera is so different from what mainstream Western American audiences would consider a musical that you're going to lose them immediately.
Yeah, it's really hard to modernize opera. I mean, fuck it, I still love opera, but it's a lot easier to find that kind of in between. Repo the Genetic Opera was probably the most contemporary thing that I saw attempt, and even that was wonky as
I don't know
fuck.
what you're talking about.
Fun.
Paul Sorvino singing is great.
I know,
love that
right?
movie, though, but it is abjectly
Me
not
too,
good.
me too.
It is...
Absolutely. It's just a very difficult thing. And they, of course, had to do a little cheats like the comic book interludes to avoid speaking lines. And it's like, okay, at that point, just don't worry about the strict structure. Just make it a musical that's predominantly music. Just stop.
I mean, American audiences, I'm not going to speak for all of them, wholesale, but I will say that there seems to be, for a large portion of American audiences, opera is so far outside of their wheelhouse, but there's no interest. I mean, and look, if you want to make The Fly the musical, honestly, if it's me and I make The Fly the musical, I don't make it serious. I make it comedic. I steer into the ridiculousness of the story. Because at the end of the day, I mean, the original film in 1958, it's not scary now. I mean, it's, you got Vincent Price and David Hedison, and there's a guy with a giant 20-pound fly head walking around. I mean,
genius.
It's hella dumb. Yeah. That's what Cronenberg didn't exploit in his version, and the fact that it was produced by Brooks Films apparently confused a lot of people. If you read stuff at the time, people were like, "I went into this movie. It was produced by Mel Brooks. I was expecting a comedy."
Well, the other movie he made at that time, even earlier than this, was The Elephant Man. So, wait, what are these themes that Mel Brooks is following? Man, not quite man.
And, at the end of the day, for the film's problems, because again, I think we've highlighted a lot of them, and, it has less problems than the opera. It has way less problems than the sequel. It has way, way less problems than the comic book sequel. So the third, ostensibly what could be considered to be the third outing of this story of the Brundle Fly and the Brundle family line, The Fly, at its heart, is still a very interesting film. And like you said, Maggie, earlier, even in its failures, it still has something interesting to do. It's not just spinning its wheels.
Right.
And there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. And I would agree. I do not feel that this was a wasted 94 minutes of my life watching this movie at all.
And if you watch it with people who have never seen it before, their reactions are fucking priceless.
Only takes one fingernail and
that's
gone.
The truth. I watched this film with my family this afternoon, and the fingernail scene was bad. The vomit drop scene was worse. I mean, it's just
so good.
I mean, look, again, it's not a film for the faint of heart. If you've never seen it and you're interested in watching it, maybe watch the kind of best of the makeup on YouTube and see if that's Because that's pretty much, I mean, you're going to see all the stuff from the movie that is kind of the bread and butter of the film. And so if you can make it through that and you're still interested, sit down and watch the movie. But, you know, I mean, again, at least it's not the second movie that doesn't know when to hold off on the effects. And you've got Jeff Goldblum, and Jeff Goldblum is consistently great in most things that he's in.
It's probably my favorite role he is in.
I would have to agree with you. I would have to agree with you 100%. He's less Ian Malcolm in this movie than he is in almost every other role, which that's the thing about Jeff Goldblum now, right? It's kind of like Will Ferrell. Everyone just kind of expects that Jeff Goldblum is going to do the eccentric weirdo thing from Jurassic Park, and he kind of just has never said, I won't do that. He just kind of always does that, and maybe that's what Jeff Goldblum's always like, because if you watch interviews with him, I think he might actually be like that in real life. He seems kind of like an interesting guy, to say the least.
Well, if you can, track down a show he did in the early 80s called 10 Speed and Brown Shoe with Ben Vereen, where they are teamed as a comically, eccentrically mismatched pair of crime fighters brought to us by Stephen J. Cannell, creator of the A-Team and the Rockford Files and The Greatest American Hero. So when he was on a roll, he brought us 10 Speed and Brown Shoe. It was Jeff Goldblum's first job.
And hey, Jeff Goldblum also knows how to play the piano, I believe, which is, you know, good for him. That's awesome. So
he got to flaunt it right
Capitol
there.
Studio Sessions is actually a pretty good jazz album, if that's the thing that you're into. So, on the note of Jeff Goldblum's jazz career, which is completely as far outside of the realm of The Fly as humanly possible, I am curious, Richard, what would you give The Fly out of 5?
I'm going to give The Fly. I'm going to give The Fly 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5. 80%.
What about you, Maggie?
I was thinking probably 4.5. It's one of those where, it has its problems, but I like the 95-minute movies. It may go by way too fast and they can't elaborate, but man, short, sweet, to the point, you get the gist.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, look, The Fly is 20 minutes shorter than its sequel, and its sequel didn't need those 20 minutes, and it did nothing with them, so...
God,
it's surprising that the Fly 2 is 100 minutes and the original film is like 86. So there you go. As for myself, I'm going to give it a 4. Again, I love it. It's a great movie, but yeah, it has its problems. But, you know, it's like anything else. I can love it in spite of its problems. So there you go. Well, speaking of movies that people have definitely seen before, let's take a break and we'll talk about the next movie we're talking about on the Culture Cast.
Adam and Barbara are recently deceased. They were happy to haunt in peace until the new residents moved in. To rid themselves of these pesky pests, they call on the ghost world's leading bioexorcist.
It's showtime. Attention, keyboard shoppers. I'm back. You want somebody out of the house? I want to get somebody out here. But I want out. For good.
You two have really screwed up. I want Beetlejuice out of the picture. You guys really are dead.
Nightshades promise. Spirits drive. To the living, let now the dead,
shall we,
come alive.
That is why I won't do 2 shows a night anymore, babe. I won't.
That's right. On the next episode of the Culture Cast, we're talking about this little indie film that I guarantee you've probably never heard of, Beetlejuice. Ever heard of that movie? I haven't. Weird. That's what a bizarre movie. Have you guys ever heard of this film with Michael Keaton?
Who's Michael Keaton?
Oh boy, I don't know what we're gonna say about Beetlejuice.
It's an Alec Baldwin film.
It is an Alec Baldwin film. I always forget that Alec Baldwin's in that movie for some reason.
It's primarily known as a Buck Henry Jeffrey Jones movie.
Boy, Jeffrey Jones. You know what's funny? Before we close this episode out, I hadn't noticed this yet. So this is Geena Davis in the 80s month. 3 of the 5 movies we're going to be talking about this month have Jeff Goldblum in them.
Jeff Goldblum or Jeffrey Jones?
Jeffrey Jones is in 2 of them. Jeff Goldblum is in 3 of them.
Oh, is that because they were dating?
Jeff Goldblum and Geena Davis were married.
Oh, okay. Well, that's like dating.
That's kind of similar.
Not married any longer, but they actually got married after this film. So it just
that set the tone.
It just begs the question if Jeff had some of those those prosthetics. He was just like, "Is this what you're into?" And he just walks in to the bedroom with this like weird deformed tumor head on. He's like, "Hey," and she's like, "Oh my God, get out of here, Jeff. What the fuck are you doing? I want a divorce. You've taken this role too
tear my jaw.
Tear my jaw. You've taken this role too far, Jeff. What did I tell you about wearing the fly prosthetics to bed?" Oh Lord. So Richard, until you're on the Culture Cast the next time, which will be sometime next month, where can people find you?
I have a very low profile on social media. You can only find me on Twitter and then only occasionally at Richard Hatem.
And Maggie, what about you?
The peak of the highest mountain in the most southern state, or Instagram at Maggie the Odd.
I thought you were going to say we could find you in a telepod coming to you soon.
No, because I don't want to be part telepod, thank you.
Part telepod. Oh.
Just shoot me now.
I want to die. Let me die in peace. As for myself, you can find me on Twitter at casualty_Chris. You can find the podcast on Twitter at CultureCast and on the internet at culturecast.com. We do have a Patreon if that's the thing you're into. If not, hey, I totally get it. Times is hard. Big thanks to Maggie and Richard for joining me, and Richard for watching this for the first time, somehow still wondering how that happened. And as always...
Hey, thank you for making me watch it, man. That's the gift you give me.
Hey, at least it wasn't... what the hell was the name of that movie we did last year? Lost Souls? Well of Souls?
House on the... No, well, that one was horrible, but what about that weird... the porno comedy, the House on the Hill, or the House
2020 has been a weird year on the Culture Cast, folks.
Can't wait to come back.
And make sure to check out the next episode.